He winked and said, "Got a side hustle. I didn't press. I figured maybe he deserved something nice." He'd worked hard. Then came the first audit. It wasn't serious, just a random IRS check, but I remember the way Charlie reacted when the letter arrived, his face drained of color. "Don't worry," he said too quickly. "I'll handle it." I should have paid attention to that flicker of panic. Instead, premier. Let him handle it. He must have fixed the books fast, because the audit passed without issue. I didn't know then that he had 2 sets of ledgers, one for me, one for him. Years rolled on. I got married, had a daughter, expanded the business. Charlie was there, for all of it my best man at the wedding, my daughter's godfather. That's the part that cuts the deepest. He wasn't just an employee. Ewa family. When me with Lavra, he stepped up, handled payroll, contracts, everything. "You take care of her," he said. "I've got the rest covered." I was too grateful, too distracted to see what he was really doing. He wasn't just stealing money. He was rewriting the story of our business, line by line. By 2022, when I finally took a breath and looked at our accounts again, something didn't add up. Profits were down, but our workload had tripled. "Must be inflation," Charlie said. But inflation didn't explain the 6-figure hole in our books. I started digging, quietly. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. The breakthrough came from a contractor we'd used for years, a guy named Pete. "Hey, Mike," he said over the phone one afternoon. "Just checking, did you really approve to payments for that drywall job last quarter?" My heart sank. To payments. Première checked. Sure enough, one invoice had been altered, same vendor ID, different account number. That's when I started my own ledger. Every suspicious transaction, every duplicate payment, every mysterious vendor that didn't exist. I built the case line by line, the same way he had. The real twist came when I found his ledgers. They weren't hidden in some secret vault or encrypted drive. No, Charlie kept them in an old filing cabinet in the back of the office under a folder labeled Vacation Receipts. The arrogance of it almost impressed me. Side Rethrux 15, 2016 a 2019, 20 to present. Each page was dated, coded, and signed. He'd tracked every stolen dollar like it was an art form. Next to each entry was a note, CYA, tax buffer, personal loan repayment. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. "As you smiled, Lady White," he said again, leaning forward. "You wouldn't have survived without me. You think you'd have gotten those contracts, those investors, without what I did? You need to use UDD2 untouchable. Maybe 15. Butiti mad the numbers. Innombre. The lawsuit took nearly a year to build, and every day of it felt like pulling splinters out of my own skin. Friends I'd known for decades chose sides. Some said I should have just fired him quietly, kept it out of the courts. But no, this wasn't just about money. It was a boy from me family. From every worker who'd trusted that our company was built on something real. And so here we are, me, standing in front of him, holding the proof of everything he'd done. "You kept records of every dollar you stole," I told him, voice trembling but steady. "You signed your own confession." He chuckled, that same smug grin curling at his lips. "And you think that'll hold up in court?" "Oh, I don't think," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. "I know." That was the day he stopped smiling. The silence that followed my words was heavy, almost unnatural. Charlie's smirk wavered, just slightly. He glanced down at 10 bakokmafralda klikkelig caught in the act, but still trying to figure out if he could talk his way out of it. "You're bluffing," he said finally. "Those books, they're meaningless. Without context. You don't have the bank records, the transfers, I have everything." I cut in, leaning forward. "Every account you rerouted money through. Every fake vendor you made up. Every personal expense you buried in project costs. I even have your emails approving those payments." "You think I didn't check?" He blinked, just once. A small, involuntary twitch, but I saw it. That was the moment he realized he'd underestimated me. I'd spent months preparing for this late nights in the office. Scanning years of old invoices, matching signatures, cross-referencing bank statements. I'd hired a forensic accountant, a quiet woman named Lydia, who spoke in data and evidence instead of emotion. She'd been the one to spot the pattern, the duplicate vendor codes. The subtle alterations in the numbers that only someone deeply familiar with our books would notice. He wasn't sloppy. Lydia had said during one of our late-night sessions, her glasses glinting under the desk lamp. He was deliberate. The kind of deliberate that assumes no one's ever going to look too closely. That was Charlie's real. Crime, not just the theft, but the arrogance of thinking I'd never see it. He stood up now, pacing behind the desk that used to be mine. "You can't prove intent," he said, his voice rising. "You gave me authorization for every transaction, not for the ones you forged," I said quietly. "Not for the shell companies you registered under your cousin's name. Not for the luxury trips you rode off as client. Meetings. You remember that week in CABO?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah," I said softly. "Laura was in the hospital that week. I was sleeping on a chair next to her bed while you were drinking cocktails on company money for the first time." He didn't have an answer. The room went still except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. Dust motes floated through the sunlight, spilling across the carpet, tiny flecks of gold in a scene that felt biblical in its finality. He sat back down slowly, his voice quieter now. "You're really going through with this?" "I already did," I said. "The suit was filed this morning. The sheriff will serve you the papers before lunch for a long time." He just stared at me. Then a bitter laugh escaped his lips. 15 years. Mike, 15 years I built this company with you. You think you can erase that with a lawsuit?" "I'm not erasing it," I said. "I'm reclaiming it." He shook his head, almost pitying. "You don't get it, do you? I didn't just steal money, I built you. Without my adjustments, you wouldn't have made it past year 2. You think those big contracts came from your reputation? I greased palms, Mike. I played dirty so you could stay clean. It was meant to make me doubt myself. And forth, it almost did. But then I remembered Laura's words from the night before she died. "Don't let him make you small," she'd whispered, her voice frail but clear. "You built this with your hands, Mike, with your sweat. Don't let a man like that rewrite your story." So I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Maybe you did play dirty. But that's your story, not mine." He laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "You'll regret this. You think the courts care about your moral crusade? All they'll see is a messy partnership dispute. Then we'll let the evidence do the talking," I said. Elinet Bakin. His chair, crossing his arms. "You really think you're the hero in this?" "No," I said, walking toward the door. "I just stopped being your victim as I stepped out of the office." I heard the sound of papers being scattered behind me, his final act of defiance. I didn't look back. Outside, the late afternoon, sun hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The lawsuit was just beginning, and I knew it would get ugly. He'd deny, countersue, drag my name through the mud. But I didn't care. The truth was on my side now. His own ledgers, the ones he thought made him untouchable, were going to bury him. Weeks later, the case made the local papers. Business partner, accused of embezzling. Over $2 million in 15-year scheme. They printed his mugshot right under the headline. His expression was the same smug grin I'd seen 1,000 times, but his eyes, those eyes finally looked scared. When the trial began, I sat in the courtroom, hands clasped, while the prosecutor laid out the evidence. Every dollar he'd stolen, every false invoice, every deposit. Traced back to him. They projected his handwriting on the screen, the neat little notes he'd made beside each theft, saya, tax buffer, personal repayment. It was grotesque in its precision. The jurors looked disgusted. When the defense tried to argue that I'd known about the thefts and benefited from them, I didn't flinch. I just let the numbers speak. Lydia's analysis, the bank statements, the timestamps, all of it painted the same picture. Charlie wasn't protecting the company. He was gutting it. And when the prosecutor read aloud the entry dated the week Laura died, transferred $12,800 under medical grant, client won't notice. I saw his lawyer lower his head. Evenicul note de fantat. Charlie didn't look at me during the verdict. He just stared straight ahead as the judge pronounced him guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. 15 years, the judge said. 1 year for every year he stole from me. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I didn't give statements. I didn't celebrate. I just walked to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the horizon for a long time. You'd think winning would feel like victory, but it felt empty, almost. That night, I went back to the office, the real one, the one I'd rebuilt without him. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the last of his ledgers. For a moment, I just held it, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Then I tore out the final page and fed it into the shredder. I didn't need it anymore. What I needed was peace. And for the first time in 15 years, I finally had it. The months that followed were strange quiet in a way that didn't feel real. After 15 years of chaos disguised as stability, the silence was almost unsettling. I'd wake up before dawn, the way I used to when the company was still young, expecting my phone to buzz with Charlie's calls or one of his urgent emails. But the phone stayed still. No fires to put out. No excuses to sift through. No shadow breathing over my shoulder. At first, I didn't know what to do with that silence. Hartman & Co. was still standing, though barely. The damage Charlie left behind went deeper than I'd imagined. Accounts frozen, vendors wary, employees uncertain if they'd even have jobs next month. Some of them couldn't look me in the eye, afraid to ask the question hanging between us, how did you let this happen? The truth was, I didn't have a good answer. So I did what I've always done when words failed me. I worked. I threw myself into the rebuild. Long nights, early mornings, one job at a time. The first few weeks, I couldn't even pay myself. Every dime went back into payroll and materials. Premier told. Why crew the truth about Charlie, about the lawsuit, about how we'd been robbed blind for years. Some of them left. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. They'd trusted me, and I'd trusted the wrong man. That kind of betrayal doesn't just sting, it infects. But others stayed. One of them was Pete, the contractor who'd first tipped me off about the duplicate payments. He came into my office one morning, slammed a thermos of coffee on my desk, and said, "You're not done. We're not done. We built this once, we'll build it again." And just like that, the spark came back. We started small local remodels, a few small business contracts. Nothing like the big commercial jobs we used to have, but honest work, clean work. Every invoice double-checked, every expense logged. I kept a whiteboard in the office with 3 words written across the top in red marker. No more shadows. Every time someone asked about it, I just said, "It's our new policy." But there were still ghosts. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call Charlie about a problem, like muscle memory, that refused to die. Once, I even caught myself writing him an email before I stopped, stared at the blinking cursor, and deleted it. He was gone. At least, I thought he was. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter. It came from the state correctional facility, a plain envelope, my name scrawled across the front, in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then, against my better judgment, I opened it. Greater than. Mike, greater than I bet you think you won. Maybe in court, you did. But the truth's never as clean as your lawyer made it sound. You think I kept everything in those ledgers. You think that's all there was. You built a house of cards, and I was the one holding it together. You may have the books, but I have something better memories. You can't erase what we did, or who we did it with. Be careful where you dig next. Some things are buried for a reason. Greater than. See you around. Greater than. See, my hands trembled as I read it. No from fear, but from fury. He was taunting me, even from behind bars, still playing his games, still pretending he had control. I crumpled the letter, tossed it. In the trash and didn't matter. He was done, finished. He couldn't hurt me anymore. But over the next few weeks, things started happening. A city inspector randomly showed up at one of our job sites, claiming we were missing permits. We weren't. A supplier called to say our credit line had been flagged for suspicious activity. Again, false. Then one night, my truck's windshield was smashed in the office parking lot, no witnesses. No cameras, just glass and silence. It felt familiar, like he was still out there. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe it was. Boo whispered otherwise. Charlie had always been meticulous, calculating. If he'd hidden something, money, connections. Leverage I wouldn't put it past him to have set up a contingency plan long before his arrest. I went back to Lydia, the forensic accountant. She was skeptical at first. You've already won, she said. Don't go chasing ghosts. I'm not chasing, I said. I'm confirming, she sighed, adjusted her glasses, and opened her laptop. All right then. Show me what you think he missed. We started combing through everything again, the ledgers, the bank statements, the contracts. For days, we found nothing new, and then, one night, buried deep in the digital archives of an old subcontractor file, Lydia found something. A payment record from 2017, vendor M. Sandoval Consulting. The amount wasn't large, just under 5,000, but the signature approving. It wasn't mine, and the account it went to wasn't one we'd ever used. Who's M. Sandoval? She asked. I frowned. Never heard of him. She looked up at me. You sure? Because this account number, it doesn't trace back to a business. It's offshore. A chill ran down my spine. I pulled up Charlie's ledgers again and scanned through them line by line. Nothing about Sandoval. Nothing even close. But then, in the margin of one page from 2017, I noticed something. 3 tiny initials written in pencil. MSC. Lydia leaned in. Could be coincidence, or it could be his insurance policy, I said. We started digging deeper into wire transfers, shell companies, old project files. Each breadcrumb led to another, small amounts scattered across different accounts, none of them ever large enough to raise suspicion. But when we added them all up, the total crossed 6 figures. He'd stashed money away. Alors fit. And if that letter was any indication, he wanted me to know it. That night, after Lydia left, I sat alone in the office staring at the ledgers spread across my desk. The air was still, the fluorescent light humming softly above me. I thought about Charlie sitting in his cell, smirking, knowing I'd eventually take the bait. He was still trying to control the story. But not this time. If he'd left a trail, I'd follow it. Not out of revenge anymore, but because I needed to know how deep it went, how much of my life he'd rewritten. So I picked up my pen and opened a new notebook. Across the first page, I wrote 3 words, Charlie's Ghost Trail, and beneath it, one more, start here. Next morning, I woke before sunrise, the faint smell of rain drifting through the open window. The city was still asleep, but my mind was already running at full speed. The letter, the offshore account, the initials in his ledger, it all pointed to something bigger than just stolen money. Première mat coffee black and used to drink it when Hartman & Co. was still fighting to survive. Sitting at the kitchen table, I flipped open the new notebook where I'd written Charlie's Ghost Trail. Beneath that heading, I started listing names, dates, connections. Everything that had ever felt off during the years he'd handled the books. By the time the sun was up, I had 12 names written down. I didn't know it yet, but one of those names would nearly destroy what was left of my business and almost cost me my life. The first name on the list was M. Sandoval. I spent the morning tracing the name online. Nothing. No business registry. No local records. No tax ID. But when I ran the account number, Lydia had found through a private investigator, friend Tom. An ex-cop with a knack for getting answers. You could almost hear the click of a lock turning. Tom called me that afternoon. That account doesn't belong to anyone named Sandoval, he said. It's registered to a holding company in Belize. Small, quiet, no website, no employees. You want the name on the registration? Yeah, I said, gripping the phone. He paused. You're not gonna like it. It's under C&H Development Holdings. I frowned. C&H? Ring any bells? I thought about it. Then it hit me like a hammer. Back in 2014, we'd partnered on a warehouse project with a company by that name. The owner, a slick guy named Henry Caldwell, had been Charlie's contact. I remembered, because the deal had gone bad. Caldwell had pulled out halfway through. Claiming financial restructuring, we'd lost nearly 70 grand on that job. Caldwell, I muttered. You're telling me that money went to him? I'm saying the account's tied to a company he partially owns, Tom said. But there's more who are listed as a secondaires. I froze. What? Yeah, either you signed something you didn't read, or someone signed for you. Room tilted for a second. 15 years of trust, of letting Charlie Handle, every dotted line, came crashing down. Tam's voice softened. Look, Mike, this guy didn't just steal from you, he built a whole web under your name. You want me to keep digging? Première hésitated. Yeah, but quietly, that night, I pulled the old project files from storage. I hadn't looked at them in nearly a decade. There, buried in a dusty box labeled C&H Contract 2014, was a folder with my signature on the front page. Or rather what looked like my signature. It wasn't. The lines were just slightly off, the loops tighter, the slant sharper. Anyone else might have missed it, but I'd signed my name on thousands of contracts. I knew how my hand moved. Charlie had forged it. I sat there staring at the paper for a long time, listening to the hum of the old ceiling fan. It was not money laundering anymore. It was identity theft. He'd built fake partnerships, fake shell companies, and tied them all back to me. It was brilliant, in a horrifying kind of way. I called Lydia, laptopinante. When I showed her the contract, her eyes went wide. This is bad, she said. If he tied you to those accounts legally, it's possible the IRS still thinks you're liable for whatever went through them. My stomach dropped. You're saying he could have used your identity for offshore transfers? Yeah, she finished grimly. If any of those were flagged for fraud or money laundering, they could trace it back to you. It felt like the room had lost all its air. For years, I'd thought the worst thing Charlie had done was steal from me. But this was something else entirely. I wasn't just cleaning up his mess anymore. I was fighting for my name. We worked through the night, combing through old emails, tax filings, digital archives. Lydia found correspondence between me and several supposed vendors' contracts, payment requests, approvals, all perfectly worded in my tone, complete with my electronic signature. He must have cloned your signature and writing style, Lydia said. That's why it looked so authentic. By morning, we'd uncovered 8 fraudulent contracts tied to my name, all feeding into the same offshore chain that looped back to C&H Holdings. I could barely feel my hands as I closed the last folder. He didn't just steal money, I whispered. He turned me into his front. Lydia exhaled slowly. He wanted leverage. Even if he got caught, you'd go down with him. I sat there in silence for a long time, watching the first rays of daylight filter through the blinds. Every memory of Charlie, every laugh, every toast, every handshake felt like it was burning away from the inside out. Lydia's voice broke the silence. What are you going to do? I looked at her, my voice calm but hard. I'm going to find every name he tied me to. And then I'm going to burn this web down, one string at a time, over the next 2 weeks. I called in every favor I had. Tom tracked bank records. Lydia built a timeline. I reached out to old partners, quietly, testing waters, gauging who might have known something. That's when I hit the second name on my list are Fielder, another small consultant payment from 2019, except this one wasn't offshore. Itoa local. I drove out to the listed address, my self-van office park just outside of town. The name Fielder Consulting was still on the door, faded but visible. When I walked in, the receptionist barely looked up. Appointment. No, just need to speak with whoever handles your financial accounts. She frowned. We closed the department years ago. I showed her my card. Mike Hartman. Hartman & Co. You used to do work with us. Her eyes flickered, recognition dawning. Oh, you mean Charlie. The name hit like a punch. You knew him. Knew him. He ran this office. For a while, at least. Back in what was it, 2018, 2019. He said he was consulting for you. Paid in advance, always cash, consulting for me. I asked, barely holding back the anger. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember, because he said you were expanding into property investments. I clenched my fists. Did he ever mention M. Sandoval? She paused, then shrugged. Maybe. Hard to say. There were a lot of names. He came by with clients sometimes. One of them was this woman Maria, I think. Latina, maybe mid-40s, sharp dresser. He always called her MS. My blood ran cold. MSMSC, I muttered. Under my breath. Maria Sandoval Caldwell, he said, stepping back. Thanks for your time. As I walked out into the sunlight, everything clicked into place. Caldwell, Maria Sandoval, C&H Holdings. Charlie hadn't just partnered with criminals, he'd married their money to my name. And now, even from a prison cell, he was daring me to find them. I got into my truck, turned the key, and stared out at the highway ahead. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood what Charlie meant in that letter. Be careful where you dig next. He wasn't warning me. He was challenging me. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the sky had turned that pale. Bruised shade between sunset and dusk when everything looks half alive, half dead. I pulled over on the shoulder of Route 46 and killed the engine. The hum of the tires faded, leaving only the wind and the ticking of the cooling metal. I sat there for a long while, staring at the road stretching into the distance, thinking about that letter again. Be careful where you dig next. It wasn't just a taunt anymore. It was a map. Charlie had always loved his métaphore. Et on stole me back when as a friend that burying a secret isn't how deep you dig, Mike. It's where you plant it. Put it in the right soil and it grows into something no one recognizes. Back then, I laughed. Now, I realized he'd been telling me exactly what he was doing. I pulled out my phone and called. Lydia, run another search, I said as soon as she picked up. Check for any businesses tied to the name Caldwell and Sandoval, but filter for property deeds, not corporations. Property. She asked, confused. You think they bought something? I think they hid something. She was quiet for a moment. All right. Give me an hour. While I waited, I drove to the old construction yard we used back in 2013, just a fenced-in lot now. The kind we used to store equipment and scrap material. It had been abandoned for years. We'd sold it off during one of the rough seasons, but I still had the gate code memorized. The padlock had rusted over, but it clicked open with a reluctant twist. Inside, everything was overgrown. Weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt, and the old sign Hartman & Co. builders hung crooked on its frame. It was like stepping into a memory I didn't recognize anymore. I walked across the lot, the gravel crunching under my boots, until I reached the office trailer we used back then. The door was half off its hinges, the windows broken. But on the far wall, there was still a faint outline of a corkboard where Charlie used to pin receipts and invoices. He'd always worked from here. Said he liked being close to the ground. That phrase echoed in my head now, and suddenly, I wasn't looking at the walls anymore. I was looking at the floor. The tiles were mismatched, one corner slightly raised. I knelt down and pried it loose. Beneath it, nothing, just dirt. But the soil was disturbed, looser than the rest. I hesitated. Then grabbed a broken pipe from the corner and started digging. It didn't take long. About 2 feet down, I hit metal. When I pulled it out, hit was a small lockbox, rusted, dented, but intact. My hands were shaking as I pried it open with the edge of the pipe. Inside were plastic sleeves filled with papers, a few flash drives, and one photo Charlie and Caldwell, standing in front of a half-built property, both of them grinning like devils. The name on the project sign behind them made my blood run cold. Hartman Urban Development Group. My company's name. Except I'd never heard of that project, never signed off on it. I flipped through the papers. They were contracts, receipts, and fake signatures all mine. The flash drives were labeled HUD-01 through HUDG-04. I didn't even think. I grabbed the box, threw it into the passenger seat, and drove straight back to Lydia's office. She was still at her desk when I burst in, hair messy, coffee cup in hand. You look like hell, she said. Found something worse, I replied, dropping the box on her desk. She started scanning the documents, her expression darkening by the second. Jesus, Mike, these are all tied to shell corporations registered in your name. Check the drives, I said. She plugged one in. Folders filled the screen instantly. Invoices, bank transfer, correspondence, each one dated, organized, meticulous. Charlie must have kept digital backups, she murmured. Why hide them? Insurance, I said. If his partners ever turned on him, he could prove they were all in it together. Lydia clicked open a folder labeled communication logs. Inside were hundreds of emails between Charlie, Caldwell, and Maria Sandoval. Some included me in the thread, except the messages weren't from me. They were from Reading Us One greater to then. From Mike Hartman M. Hartman at hco-bill.com greater than 2. Maria Sandoval M. Sandoval at chdev. Biz greater than subject. Transfer approval greater than Marie approved. Make sure it's split through the secondary account. I'll handle the taxes on my end. Greater than. M. The date was 2019, right around the time my wife was dying. I felt my throat tighten. He'd been moving stolen money while I was at the hospital. Lydia looked up at me. You realize what this means, right? This isn't just embezzlement anymore. This is full-blown financial fraud. International. The FBI would take this case. I rubbed my face, trying to steady my breathing. He's still playing, I said quietly. Evan. From prison, he's still pulling strings. The question is, what's his endgame? Lydia frowned. Maybe he's trying to drag you down with him. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he's making sure his friends stay hidden. She leaned back in her chair. So what do we do? I stared at the drives, the papers, the signatures that weren't mine. We find Maria Sandoval, even if she's overseas. Especially if she's overseas. For the next several days, I didn't sleep much. Lydia worked the digital side, Tom tracked travel records, and I followed paper trails. Every path circled back to Maria. She was the ghost behind everything, the silent partner. The one who'd bankrolled Charlie's schemes and vanished before the trial. We finally found her in a real estate registry in Florida. A beachfront condo, bought under an alias 6 months after Charlie's arrest, paid in full, cash. Think she knows he's in prison? Lydia asked when she pulled up the address. Oh, she knows, I said. She's probably waiting for him to come out. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Miami. When I got to the condo building, a tall glass tower overlooking the ocean, the concierge confirmed she was in. I rode the elevator up to the 22nd floor, my pulse pounding like a drum. The hallway was quiet. I found the door number 2207 and knocked once. It opened halfway, and a woman stood there. Mid-40s, dark hair, poised but tense. Her eyes widened the instant she saw me. Saw me, Karma, she's like a question. So you do know who I am, I replied. She glanced past me, then back. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you, I said, holding up a photo from the boxer and Charlie, standing next to Caldwell. We need to talk. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on the edge of the door. He told me you'd come eventually. Then he was right, I said. And I'm not leaving until you tell me what you and Charlie were really doing. She sighed, stepped aside, and gestured for me to enter. The condo was spotless white walls, expensive art, not a thing out of place. She poured herself a drink, motioned toward the couch, and said quietly, You really want to know? I met her gaze. I've waited 15 years to know. She took a sip, exhaled slowly, and said, Then I'll start from the beginning. But understand this, Mike Charlie didn't just steal from you. He built something with your name. Something you can't undo. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the real one. She took another, slow sip of her drink before setting it down, with deliberate care. The glass clicked against the marble tabletop, a small, precise sound that somehow carried the weight of a confession. Charlie was never your bookkeeper, she began. Not really. Not in the way you thought. I frowned. Then what was he? She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. A middleman. A fixer. He wasn't stealing for himself, Mike. He was managing theft for people who had more to lose than you could ever imagine. I felt my chest tighten. Managing? You mean laundering, among other things, she said. You were his cover. The perfect, front honest, hard-working, clean reputation. No criminal background. No debts. No reason for anyone to dig too deep. You made the money look legitimate. I stared at her, trying to process it. You're saying? All those missing funds, those fake vendors, they weren't just for him. She nodded once. He was channeling money through your projects. Mike, millions. Every time a contract came in under budget or an investor overpaid, it didn't just disappear. It was moved, filtered, through shell accounts tied to you, then funneled out to offshore holdings. I sank back into the couch, feeling like the floor had dropped away. And you? I helped set up the accounts, she admitted. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. Charlie promised it was temporary, that he'd close everything before you ever noticed. Said you were too good a man to be dragged into it. I almost laughed at that, too bitter to stop myself. He dragged me in the second he forged my name. She looked down. He loved your name. Said it was the one thing he couldn't manufacture. Her voice softened. Almost regretful, and for a second I could see it the trace of something human beneath all the deception. But it vanished as quickly as it came. I leaned forward. Leo said he worked for someone. Who? She hesitated, then said Henry Caldwell was one of them. But there were others, private investors, real estate syndicates, even a few politicians. They used Charlie to move dirty money through legitimate channels. Construction's perfect. For that you can bury millions in material costs and no one blinks. I clenched my jaw. Aunt Wenzel. Law finally caught up with him. He was supposed to stay quiet, she said, but he didn't trust Caldwell anymore. That's why he kept your ledgers his leverage. Proof of every transaction, every deal. He thought if Caldwell turned on him, he could trade your business records for immunity, so he kept both of us on the hook, I said, the words tasting like rust. Yes, I stood up, pacing. No. That he's in prison. What, Caldwell's still out there? Using my name to cover his tracks? Maybe, she said. Or maybe he's already moved on. But there's something you should know. She walked to a drawer in the sideboard, unlocked it, and pulled out a manila folder. She held it out, her expression grim. Charlie sent me this a week before he was arrested. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you. I took it warily and opened it. Inside were documents, bank, statements, wire transfers, and a handwritten note. The handwriting was Charlie's. Greater than Mike, greater than if you're reading this, then it means I finally miscalculated. Don't flatter yourself, it's not because you were smarter than me. You were just cleaner, and that made you useful, but there's something you don't understand. The money wasn't mine. It never was. And now that it's gone, they'll come looking for it. Greater than. Asterisk. Keep the ledgers closed. They're not evidence à erreur protection. Everyone, whoever touched that money is marked, including you. Asterisk greater than you always said you wanted to build something that lasted. Well, congratulations, you did. But it's not what you think. Greater than. See, my hands went cold. What does this mean? Maria's voice was low, steady. It means there's still money missing. Mike, a lot of it. Charlie told Caldwell he moved everything offshore, but he didn't. He hid a portion somewhere else. Somewhere only you could access. Me, I said, incredulous. Why the hell would he do that? Because he trusted you more than he trusted anyone. And maybe, in his own twisted way, he thought you'd keep it safe. I felt my pulse quicken. You're saying he stashed stolen money under my name. Sure or dead. Accounts, assets somewhere tied to your identity. Think about it. If he forged your signature once, he could do it again. All he had to do was create a trail you'd never think to check. I rubbed my temples, trying to think through the storm. And now these people Caldwell, and the rest they think I have it? Maria's silence was all the answer I needed. I swore under my breath. So what, you expect me to just wait for them to show up? No, she said. You find the money first. Then you decide what happens next. I looked up sharply. You're helping me now. Her expression softened, just barely. I'm helping myself. Charlie made promises to me, 2 promises that died the moment he went to prison. If Caldwell finds that money before you do, we're both dead. A chill spread through me. Where do we start? She poured another drink, her hand trembling, slightly this time. Start with the one place he thought no one would ever look. The one thing he loved almost as much as money. I frowned. What's that? She met my eyes. Your company. I stared at her, not understanding. Charlie didn't just move money through Hartman & Co., she said. He built a second company. Under its name a twin that mirrors your structure almost exactly. Different registration, different IN, same everything else. It even uses your logo. My voice came out rough. A shadow company. Exactly. And I'd bet every dollar I have that the missing money's buried in its accounts. The room went dead quiet. The waves outside crashed against the shore, the only sound between us. I stood there, absorbing it, all the years of deceit, the layers of betrayal. The realization that even now, Charlie was still manipulating me from behind bars. Finally, I said, "Where is it?" She smiled faintly, a weary kind of smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment. Nevada. Small town called Mason Creek. That's where. The registration leads. It's where your shadow company is headquartered. I exhaled slowly. You coming with me? She hesitated. If I do, there's no going back. Neither of us can, I said. Not anymore. She finished her drink, grabbed her purse, and nodded. Then, let's find out what he buried. As we walked out of the condo, the air was heavy and wet, thunder rumbling in the distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that Charlie was somewhere out there. Smiling, that same smug smile, watching the next chapter unfold exactly as he'd planned. Because if I'd learned one thing by then, it was this: Charlie never left loose ends. He just left traps. The rain followed us all the way to the airport, thin sheets that streaked across the windshield like veins of glass. Maria drove, silent, focused, one hand on the wheel and the other clutching that same manila folder. She hadn't said a word since we left the condo, and I didn't press her. Premier Wateau. Busy trying to quiet the storm in my head. A shadow company. The words wouldn't stop repeating themselves. It was the perfect disguise, so perfect I almost admired it. Charlie hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built an entire reflection of my business, hidden just out of sight. Every transaction, every project, every dollar roll mirrored. It was like looking at my own face and realizing it wasn't me. At the airport, we bought last-minute tickets to Nevada under aliases. Hers was Sandra Mills, mine Mark Hunter. It felt ridiculous, but Maria insisted. If Caldwell's people are watching, you can't show up as Mike Hartman, she said. You're too visible now. I didn't argue. Visibility was a liability in this game. The flight was long and quiet, the kind of silence that vibrates between two people carrying too much truth. Somewhere over Texas, Maria finally spoke. Charlie always liked Nevada, she said softly, almost to herself. Said it was a good place to make ghosts. Too many shell companies, too many banks that don't ask questions. I looked at her, and you went along with it. She met my eyes without flinching. I believed him. We all did. He was charming, brilliant, and ruthless. That's a dangerous combination. You never think the fire's going to burn you until you're standing in the ashes. I turned back to the window, watching lightning ripple through clouds below us. He told me once he didn't believe in luck, I said. Said it was just the name people gave to other people's preparation. She gave a small, humorless smile. Sund. Like him, when we landed in Reno, it was just after midnight. Mason Creek was another 2-hour drive west of sleepy mining town turned industrial outpost. The kind of place that still closed at 8 p.m. and smelled faintly of dust and diesel. We rented a car and drove in silence. The only light came from the dashboard glow and the occasional passing truck. Maria scrolled through her phone, checking the registration trail. According to the Secretary of State Filings, she said, the company's called Hartman. Development Group LLC, established 2018, same business category as. Yours commercial construction and contracting, registered agent, I asked. She scrolled again. A man named Daniel Hark. Hark, she nodded. Could be a pseudonym. Could also be a ghost signature someone Caldwell used as a placeholder, or Charlie himself. I muttered. Maria didn't answer. She didn't have to. Where achèd? Mason Creek around 2:30 a.m. The town was half asleep, the neon sign for a diner flickering at the edge of Main Street. We found 812, 400. Ridgeview, Industrial Park. It turned out to be a warehouse complex, mostly abandoned. Doesn't look like much, I said, stepping out into the cold air. That's the point, Maria replied. The front door was locked, but the side. Garde-toi open? We slipped through, the gravel crunching beneath our shoes. The building looked dead from the outside, but when I peered through the grimy glass, I saw faint light flickering in one of the back offices. Someone was here. Maria froze. Mike, she whispered. We shouldn't, but I was already moving. My pulse hammered in my ears as I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like something old and resentful. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stale coffee. We crept down the hall toward the light. It was coming from an office at the far end door, slightly ajar, the sound of paper rustling inside. I nudged the door open, and there he was. Not Charlie, at least not in the flesh. But his face was everywhere. Dozens of photographs lined the walls, tacked up like a detective's case board images of me, my wife, my daughter, our construction sites, my workers, even my old house. Notes scrawled in Charlie's handwriting connected them with red thread. As the Santé, in Bob Black Maca, were the words. The cover, Maria's breath curt. Oh my God. I stepped closer. The papers on the desk were bank records, recent ones. The shadow company was still active. Transactions as recent as 2 weeks ago. He's still moving money, I whispered. Impossible, she said. He's in prison. I pointed at the account logs. Then someone's doing it for him. Just then, the office lights flickered and a sound echoed from deeper in the building. The slam of a metal door. Maria spun around. Someone's here. I moved to the window, peering out into the dark lot. A figure was walking toward a black SUV parked by the gate. Stay here, I said, Mike, but I was already running. I burst through the back exit just as the figure reached the SUV. The person turned, startled by the sound of my footsteps. For a second, our eyes met under the flickering security light. It wasn't Caldwell. It was a man I'd never seen before, tall, mid-50s, sharp suit, calm eyes. Trop calme. He didn't dent even flush. He just opened the driver's door, slipped inside, and rolled down the window. You shouldn't be here, Mr. Hartman, he said, voice smooth as polished steel. The hell are you? I demanded. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm the man cleaning up the mess your friend left behind. Charlie! He nodded once. He was valuable, predictable, until he wasn't. I took a step closer. Where's the money? He laughed softly. You really think it's about money? No, Mr. Hartman. It's about what that money represents. Control, access, and now that your name's attached to it, you're part of the ledger too. My stomach turned. If you think I'm letting you keep it, he cut me off with a small gesture. You misunderstand. I don't need to keep anything. I just need to erase you from the equation. The SUV's engine roared to life. I barely jumped back in time as it peeled away, gravel spraying into the air. Maria ran out seconds later, eyes wide. Who was that? I don't know, I said, staring after the disappearing taillights. But he knew Charlie, and he knows you, she said. I looked back at the warehouse, at the photos and ledgers plastered inside. The truth hit me like a brick. Charlie hadn't built the shadow company as an escape plan. He'd built it as bait. For them. For me. He'd set this whole thing up, every ledger, every trail, every secret to lead me right here. And now, the people he worked for knew I was looking. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, watching the last trace of the SUV disappear into the desert night. We finished what he started, I said. We finally, we're exposed him when this for good. But I'd shake one thought. Cold and unrelenting. Charlie wasn't done with me, not even from prison. We didn't sleep that night. By the time the sun rose over Mason Creek, the warehouse looked less like a crime scene and more like a shrine to manipulation. The red thread, map of my life, the forged papers, the ledgers, each was a ghost of Charlie's genius and cruelty. Every detail was curated, deliberate. Like a magicien. Leaving his final illusion behind for an audience of one. And I was the audience. Maria sat on the edge of the desk, sifting through the papers we'd found. Her face was pale, but composed, the kind of calm that comes from years of walking through fire. He planned this, she murmured. Every damn piece of it. I nodded, scanning another stack of records. He wanted me to find this place. Wanted me to see the shadow he made. But why? Because this isn't just about the money, I said. It's about control. He's still playing the game, from inside a cell. Maria gave a small, tired laugh. So what? He's some kind of criminal puppeteer now. I looked at her. You knew him. Does that sound far-fetched? She didn't answer. The hum of the overhead light filled the silence. Premier could. Hear my pulse pounding in my ears as I flipped through another folder. Labor 2024 feeding this company cash. Using it to wash funds through legitimate projects. But one detail stood out, repeated across every page in neat print. Account reconciliation. Vault project. What's the Vault project? I asked. Maria leaned in, frowning. I've never heard of it. Then that's where we start. We traced the account routing, number listed beside the vault transfers. Lydia, working remotely from her office, joined the search through encrypted messages. After all, she pinged us. Greater than. Lydia, that account's registered to a facility outside Reno. Private storage. Officially listed as a materials archive. But get, this its founding agent is the same Daniel Hawk guy from the Mason Creek filings. Greater than. Me? You sure? Greater than Lydia. Positive. It's still active. And Mike, there's a withdrawal last week. Cash. Over $500,000. Me. From a storage facility. Greater than. Lydia, that's what the record says. I stared at the screen. A week ago. Someone had been there, someone moving money Charlie had supposedly hidden years ago. Maria Luqued? Over my shoulder. So, the vault, yeah, I said. Let's see what Charlie left us this time. The drive back toward Reno took less than 2 hours, but it felt longer. Every mile of highway stretched like an accusation, 15 years of trust, betrayal, and silence unraveling in the desert sun. The facility sat at the edge of an industrial district, white concrete walls, no signage, just a small keypad gate and a faded Hark storage and supply logo. The air was dry, humming faintly with the sound of power lines. We parked near the side entrance. Maria watched the perimeter with wary eyes while I checked the padlock. It wasn't new. I slipped a pry bar between the latch and twisted until the metal snapped loose with a pop. J'adore. Criquet de pain. Inside, rows of crates and file cabinets stretched into the dim light, everything labeled, catalogued, obsessively organized. This doesn't look like a front, Maria whispered. I moved down one aisle, scanning the labels, blueprints, invoices, construction logs, vendor receipts. All fake, all tied to projects that had never existed. But at the back of the room, a single steel door caught my eye. No label, no handle, just a keypad and a small security camera angled toward it. Maria followed my gaze. That looks promising, or deadly, I muttered. The keypad blinked red, waiting for input. Above it was a faint, smudged fingerprints worn into the metal. Someone had used it recently. Maria reached out. Try a code. Premier hésitated. Then typed O for 5 Charlie's birthday. The light turned green. We exchanged a look, then I pushed the door open. The room beyond was smaller, colder. A single desk sat in the center, illuminated by a lone overhead bulb. On the desk, 3 things. A laptop, a sealed envelope, and another of Charlie's black ledgers. The sight of it made my stomach twist. Maria stepped closer, eyes fixed on the envelope. You think it's... Yeah, I said. An azage première piquée d'étape from the frobo. For Mike, my hands felt heavy as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Greater than. You finally found it. I was starting to think you'd never come. Don't bother asking how I knew. You were always predictable, Mike. Righteous to the bone. It's what made you useful and what will destroy you. Greater than greater than. By now, you've probably met one of Caldwell's men. Maybe even found Maria. If she's still alive, you'll both want to run. You won't, though. You'll want to fix it. It's what you do. That's why I chose you. Greater than greater than. The vault isn't money. It's leverage. Everything Caldwell and his partners did, all the transfers. All the account sits here. And it's not just their secrets anymore. Mike, it's yours too. Greater than greater than. I left the key where you'd understand. Greater than. Look under what you built. Greater than greater than. See, I read it twice. Then Attorney Mara said. Look under what you built. Maria repeated softly. What does that mean? I looked around the room. Nothing but the desk, the chair, and the cold concrete floor. Tenititme. The foundations. I whispered. She frowned. What? Charlie used to say that phrase, everything starts with a foundation. He wasn't talking about buildings. He meant control. The groundwork. The structure no one sees. I dropped to my knees and ran, my hands along the edge of the floor. One tile near the wall was uneven. I pried it loose. Beneath it another lockbox, smaller than the last. When I opened it, I expected more documents. But instead, there was only a single USB drive and a Polaroid photo. The photo was of me taken years ago. Probably around 2014, I was standing in front of one of our first big projects, smiling, arm around Charlie. We looked like two proud founders celebrating success. But someone had. Written across the bottom, in red ink, everything we built was theirs. Maria stared at the USB drive. If that has what I think it has, it's the vault, I said quietly. Not cash, evidence. She hesitated. Mike, if this exposes them, it'll expose you too. The fake accounts, the contracts, your name's on all of it. I met her eyes. Then we ended anyway. She didn't argue. I plugged the drive into the laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder titled Root. Inside were hundreds of files, bank logs, transfer records, contracts, and encrypted communications. And one video, the file name, final_message.mov. I clicked it. The screen lit up with static. Then Charlie's face appeared. Older, unshaven, filmed from what looked like a prison cell. He smiled calm, smug, unbothered. Mike, he said, if you're watching this, it means I was right. Abuyu, you couldn't leave it alone. I felt Maria tense beside me. Charlie leaned closer to the camera, his voice low and almost affectionate. You think this ends with Caldwell? You think exposing them fixes anything? No, my friend. The system doesn't collapse, it absorbs. You burn one part, it grows back somewhere else. The only question is, when it does, whose name will be at the top? He smiled wider. Spoiler alert, already went black. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Maria's voice trembled. He's framing you. I stared at the dark screen. No, I said quietly. He's replacing himself. She blinked. What do you mean? I looked at the files again. My name, my company, my signature tied to every major transaction. Charlie had passed the network to me. On paper, I wasn't just complicit anymore. I was the head. He'd built a legacy of corruption and then made me its inheritor. Maria whispered, he's turned you into him, and as the realization sank in, I knew she was right. In trying to destroy Charlie, I had stepped straight into the role he'd prepared for me all along. The only difference was he was in prison. And I was free, at least, for now. For 3 days, I didn't leave the motel. The USB drive sat on the nightstand, beside the bed like a live grenade, humming with the power to destroy everyone who had ever touched it, including me. Maria barely spoke. She sat by the window most of the time, watching the endless highway that carved through Mason Creek, waiting for headlights that might never come. On the 4th morning, I made my decision. I copied every file on the drive twice. One copy went to an encrypted cloud server Lydia had set up. The other, I burned onto a new drive and sealed inside a padded envelope. No labels, no return address. Maria turned as I zipped up my bag. What are you going to do with it? I'm sending it to the Department of Justice, I said. Anonymous drop. If what's in there is as bad as I think, they'll have to act, and when they do, she said quietly, they'll come for you too. I looked at her, tired but steady. Maybe that's the point. She stared for a long time, then exhaled. You don't have to carry this alone, you know. I already have, I said. For 15 years, we drove to Reno, in silence, both of us lost in thought. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless and indifferent. I mailed the envelope from a gas station near the highway, slipped it into the outgoing bin, and walked away without looking back. That night, we stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. The waitress poured us coffee, the kind that tasted like burnt tar, but it was hot and real. Maria stirred hers slowly, then said, you could disappear, you know, change your name, start over. I shook my head. That's what he'd do. That's what he did. I'm not Charlie. You're not, she agreed softly. But the world won't see it that way. Then I'll show them, I said. I'll rebuild, again. Without secrets this time, she gave a small smile. You're stubborn. Occupational hazard. We sat there until the neon lights outside flickered out and the sky turned the color of ash. She left before sunrise, without saying goodbye. Just a note on the table. You did what he never could. You let go. I stayed another day, watching the headlines unfold online. The DOJ, the FBI, and half a dozen agencies launched coordinated raids across 3 states. Caldwell's empire collapsed overnight. Offshore accounts frozen, associates indicted. Charlie's name was everywhere, his schemes, his companies, his downfall. And mine. My name appeared too, buried deep in the coverage. And we tinked, te calmo, victim of identity fraud, but the truth was never that simple. I hadn't known, not really, but I hadn't asked either. I'd trusted him, because it was easier than facing what might be beneath the surface. That was my sin. A week later, I drove back to my hometown. The old Hartman & Co. office was still there, empty, quiet, the walls stripped bare. The sign was gone, but the faint outline of the letters remained. I walked through the rooms, ran my hand over the worn desk where Charlie once sat, and finally understood what he meant when he said, "Everything we build is borrowed." He was wrong, though, because what I built, the real Hartman & Co., wasn't in the ledgers or the contracts. It was in the people who stayed when everything else fell apart. Pete, Lydia, the workers who refused to quit even when the paychecks stopped coming. They were the foundation. And foundations, I realized, don't vanish, they endure. I started again. Small projects, local work, honest work. The kind of jobs that didn't need hiding places or shadow accounts. It was slow at first, but it felt clean, real, every dollar accounted for, every handshake meaning what it said. Sometimes, when the sun sets just right and the light hits the windows of the new office, I catch a reflection that looks almost like him, Charlie, standing there with that smug half-smile, daring me to slip. But I don't. I nod to the ghost and turn back to the work. The ledgers, his secrets, the money, all of it, is gone now, burned to ash in the same desert where it was born. What remains is quieter, humbler, but finally mine. 15 years of betrayal ended in one simple truth. Trust is the easiest thing to give, and the hardest thing to rebuild. And though I'll never forget what he took from me, I've learned what he never could. You can't steal a man's peace, not if he decides to earn it back. I let the last ledger fall into the fire and watched the pages curl into nothing. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and dust. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the weight of his shadow anymore. It was over. Charlie was gone, and I was finally free. How could they fight over the silverware? I asked, my voice shaking, when they knew about the trust. Buto, of course they'd. No, not yet. They thought I was penniless, a foolish old man with nothing but a crumbling house and a handful of stocks left over from a better time. Watching them claw at each other across my dining table, my daughter's husband shouting about the meager assets, my eldest son waving an appraisal report like a weapon, I realized that the family I had built with patience and sweat was devouring itself over scraps. Blind to the fortune that had slept quietly beneath their feet since 1975. It hadn't always been like this. Once, the house was filled with laughter, and the air carried the warm scent of my wife's jasmine perfume. Back then, before the trust and the lawyers, before the accountants and betrayals, we were just a family. I was 34, newly married, and wildly ambitious. My name is Richard Callahan, and in the summer of 1975, I inherited a stretch of barren land in Northern California, 3,000 acres of dry hills, worthless in the eyes of anyone who didn't know what lay beneath it. Your uncle left you dirt, my father said when I brought him the will. You can't grow corn on rocks. Maybe he was right then. The land was nothing but twisted oak, red soil, and wind. But I felt something in it, a pulse, a quiet promise, so I didn't sell it. Everion told me to take the cash and run, but I buried the deed deep in my filing cabinet and forgot about it for years, while life moved on. By 1983, I had 2 children and a small but steady business and architectural firm in Sacramento that designed schools and government buildings. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Evelyn, my wife, ran the home with elegance, hosting dinners where I drink too much wine and talked too loudly about projects I was sure would change the skyline. I thought life was predictable then, that wealth was built with blueprints and discipline. It wasn't until the late 80s that the letters started coming. Developers, oil companies, water rights investors, each one more insistent than the last. I didn't understand why they cared about my dusty parcel of land until a man from Houston flew out to meet me personally. His name was Frank Weller, and he had the polished confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Mr. Callahan," he said over lunch, "you're sitting on something big. You may not know it, But beneath that ground runs one of the last untapped geothermal veins in the region. If you says, "Where contre that?" Land into power clean, endless power. I listened, but I didn't sign. Something in his voice reminded me of a snake's hiss, too smooth, too eager. So instead, I called my attorney, an old friend named Morton Hughes, who looked like a scarecrow and thought like a fox. He read the letters, then looked up at me through his crooked glasses. "Donust,"